For a great deal of time in Russia it was believed that the name Rasputin meant licentious, and it was this image of the man that became the most prevalent. Rasputin was an accused sexual deviant, a rapist, and mad monk who played the Russian royals like keys on a piano and whispered dark urges into the tsarina's ear. Rasputin, however, does not mean licentious at all. Its meaning is closer to where two rivers meet, referring to the place where he was born. Just like his name, the true Rasputin, the man who lived and breathed, has been lost to history and replaced with caricatures, an old man with a long scraggly beard, terrible teeth and even more terrible deeds, but also a doting father, a respected holy man and a lover of beauty. It is this duality that has confounded and caused debates. To this day, was he indeed the man who brought a Russian dynasty to its knees, or has history created a scapegoat out of a man who only ever acted with good intentions? The village of Pokrovska was small even by Siberian standards. It was more like a remote scattering of houses in the wide expanse of the West Siberian plains, with only 200 dwellings and no more than 1,000 residents. It was an incredibly isolated start for the man whom every citizen of Russia would come to know, fear and loathe. But it was in this quiet, sleepy peasant village that Grigory Rasputin was born, the fifth of 9 children. From a very early age Rasputin did not fit in. He did not attend school, for there was no school for him to attend, and he soon fell into a life of debauchery and drunkenness. The peasants of the close-knit village did not trust the strange boy, and he was an outsider even in his place of birth. He found the back-breaking labor of peasant work boring and empty, and he stole horses, fences, anything to add color to his dull existence. Rasputin was not a fool. He did not live a life of crime due to incompetence, but instead because of a feeling that his life was lacking something. He had a wife, he even had children, but he still felt a gaping emptiness. Now in his 20s, he found himself, either through divine providence or banishment, at the newly expanded Verkhocherai monastery. It was there that he met Starets Makary, an elder who lived a humble existence in their woods near the monastery. Rasputin's interactions with this holy man slowly transformed the rebel youth into a deeply spiritual individual. Rasputin gave up alcohol, tobacco and meat. When he returned to Pokrovska, the rebellious criminal has become a fervent religious convert. Rasputin had been inspired by Makary but not by the monastery. Not only did he accuse the place of practicing a vice which was likely homosexuality, but he also later proclaimed that the monastic life was not for him, saying, "One finds violence over people there." He believed that only by venturing across the world could he truly become closer to God and salvation. Throughout his whole life, Rasputin had never been one to sit idly, and he was definitely not accustomed to bowing to authority and blindly following orders. So it is not surprising he was repulsed by a life of servitude in a cold stone building. Rasputin, after all, did not belong in small places, or behind locked doors. His ever-wandering heart wished to explore the vastness of the earth, and that's exactly what he set about doing. Rasputin packed few belongings, wished his family goodbye and began the life of a stranic or mystic wanderer. We do not know the extent or length of Rasputin's various pilgrimages in this stage of his life, but it is possible that he traveled as far as Mount Athos, the center of the Orthodox Church. Sometimes he did not come back home for years, and his own wife and children struggled to recognize the man that returned. However, even in this life of a stranic, Rasputin began to carve his own path. He disliked abiding by the accepted norms, preferring to do things his own way. For example, he would refuse to wear the traditional fetters and instead wore the same shirt for an entire year. He was rebellious and headstrong, but he was also thoughtful, independent and astonishingly open-minded for a peasant from a tiny village. During these years of wandering, Rasputin encountered many different kinds of people from all branches of the Russian social order. He developed strong opinions but also discovered and refined his ability to read people. Many have commented in memoirs and elsewhere that what Rasputin possessed was a very unique magnetism. He had a talent for understanding people quickly. He knew exactly what to say to them, and he was unlike any priest or holy man they had encountered. This is because it was their truth. Rasputin was different. He had not confined himself to books and the monasteries, but to the real world and real people. When he spoke about God, it was with a meaning that normal people could understand, and his own beliefs were strengthened not simply with study, but with vivid, electric and very real experiences. This magnetism began to draw people to Rasputin's home. Villagers and pilgrims further afield traveled to sit, talk, pray and seek counsel from the man. He soon amassed a loyal group of followers who would meet regularly to read from the Bible and sing religious songs in a secret chapel, a cave beneath the stables created by Rasputin himself. However, as these meetings grew in popularity, Rasputin also attracted negative attention. Rumors quickly spread that he was often seen with young women, that his followers would bathe him, and that he was teaching them mysterious rituals. Rasputin was especially despised by the resident priest of Pokrovskoe, who likely didn't relish their idea of an upstart peasant gaining such popularity over himself and his own teachings. Due to all this attention, Rasputin's meetings were abandoned, and the priest probably thought that was the end of it, but little did he know Rasputin had only just begun to scratch the surface of the power and influence he held. When Rasputin announced his intentions to travel to St. Petersburg, he was warned by a fellow holy man that the city will ruin you, but he ignored the warning. He had set his heart on a single mission, and nobody could dissuade him. Although Rasputin was a worldly man, he was completely unprepared for the city, and it could have easily swallowed him. Fortunately, his work had not gone unnoticed, and he bore a letter of recommendation that granted him access to Bishop Sergei, the rector of the St. Petersburg Seminary. Through association with Sergei, Rasputin became known to the curious elite of St. Petersburg, and the counts and countesses were fascinated by the bedraggled traveling man with his soft, strong words and strange allure. Many of the aristocracy, painfully bored with their structured, weary lives, found his peculiar ways amusing, like wearing his hair long, and the way he kissed women when first meeting them. The outsider was a curiosity, a talking point, and almost a party piece. Soon the aristocracy were introducing him, known to anyone who was anyone in the capital. After befriending Princess Milika of Montenegro and her sister Anastasia, Rasputin was then introduced by them to the two most powerful figures in the whole of Russia, the Tsar and their tsarina, Nicholas II and Alexandra. Rasputin had used his powerful words and enchanting nature to climb from the bottom rungs of Russian society to the very top. Rasputin's arrival to the lives of their imperial family could not have been better timed. If he had planned it himself, Russia was in a state of disarray. They had lost a war against Japan in devastating fashion, humiliating the country on the world stage. The Tsar also had to deal with the fallout after Bloody Sunday, where hundreds, if not thousands, of peaceful protesters were massacred by the Imperial Guard. Although Nicholas himself had not given the order to fire, for many it condemned the Tsar, who they had, until the massacre, regarded as a father. The Imperial family were facing a brutal backlash, and there was a very real chance of them losing their grip on the country entirely. Rasputin sat and listened to Alexandra's worries, and they spoke at length about religion. The holy man calmly told her that her husband needed to be closer to his people, and that she could trust his words. Alexandra immediately became close to Rasputin, as she too had a strong belief in the strength of the dynasty, and believed that he had been sent by God to secure their strength of their royal line. Alexandra's trust in Rasputin meant that when her son, Alexei, suffered from one of his hemophilic bleeding episodes, she summoned him immediately. The boy was their imperial family's only male heir, and his mother adored and doted on him. Alexandra was well aware of their seriousness of his condition. She had lost an uncle and brother to the same hereditary disease passed down from her grandmother, Queen Victoria, and it is likely she knew that it would claim her son, too. Alexei became a symbol of the future of Russian royalty. To save him was also to save Tsardom. Alexandra had spoken to many doctors and tried multiple cures for her son's disease, but nothing had worked. And so in her moment of need, with her child, Rasputin came to the palace, began to pray by the boy's bed, and amazingly, seemed to be able to calm the child, his condition rapidly improving. In another incident, Alexei sustained an injury and lay suffering and moaning for days. Alexandra, remembering how Rasputin had managed to ease her child previously, sent a telegram to the man. Rasputin quickly responded to her worries. "Their little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much." Just as he said, the boy's health went on to improve, and Alexandra became convinced Rasputin was responsible for his recovery. Rasputin's place in the royal household was secured. Although Rasputin's role was primarily as a healer to Alexei, he became a close confidant of the family, even occasionally serving as advisor to the Tsar himself. For example, he warned Nicholas about entering World War I, urging him to make peace with Germany. Nicholas, of course, went along with the war anyway, which was a huge, costly mistake to the country and to his own reputation. However, Rasputin's easy access and apparent influence over the household did not go unnoticed. Living in an apartment on Gorokhovaya Street, Rasputin was frequently visited by peasants. Believed that Sukhotin was an old friend of Felix's but was injured near the beginning of the war. Little is known about Sukhotin beyond this, but it is likely he had some familiarity with the men to become embroiled in the plot. Dangerously close to death, she called upon their mystic holy man. Rasputin came to the palace, began to pray by the boy's bed, and amazingly, seemed to be able to calm the child, his condition rapidly improving. In another incident, Alexei sustained an injury and lay suffering and moaning for days. Alexandra, remembering how Rasputin had managed to ease her child previously, sent a telegram to the man. Rasputin quickly responded to her worries. "Their little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much." Just as he said, the boy's health went on to improve, and Alexandra became convinced Rasputin was responsible for his recovery. Rasputin's place in the royal household was secured. Although Rasputin's role was primarily as a healer to Alexei, he became a close confidant of the family, even occasionally serving as advisor to the Tsar himself. For example, he warned Nicholas about entering World War I, urging him to make peace with Germany. Nicholas, of course, went along with the war anyway, which was a huge, costly mistake to the country and to his own reputation. However, Rasputin's easy access and apparent influence over the household did not go unnoticed. Living in an apartment on Gorokhovaya Street, Rasputin was frequently visited by peasants seeking assistance, but even more so by their aristocracy, many of whom planned to use him to gain their own favor at court. There were others, however, who were less than fond of the strange peasant. Malicious rumors concerning Rasputin began to resurge, that he seduced women with his charm, using his power to organize secret sex rituals. For many who had met the mad monk in passing, these claims were not out of the question, as he was seen to be overly intimate with women, and his eyes, by all accounts, were oddly hypnotizing. One memoir from the period wrote of Rasputin, "What eyes he has! You cannot endure his gaze for long. There is something difficult in him. It is like you can feel their physical pressure, even though his eyes sometimes glow with kindness. But how cruel can they be? And how frightful in anger!" Many who at first adored the curious man were swept up in a hate campaign against him. Some of Rasputin's enemies went to Nicholas and Alexandra directly to warn them of his influence, but both were quick to dismiss them. When Nicholas was urged to exile him to Tobolsk, he commented, "I know Rasputin too well to believe all the tittle-tattle about him." One of the most damning accusations against Rasputin was that he was a member of the Klestai, an underground sect split off from the Orthodox Church. The fact that he was a good dancer, and the sect was known from their dances and possible sexual promiscuity, seemed to add fuel to their accusation. Many different figures in the Orthodox Church leapt on this, accusing Rasputin of numerous immoral practices. Against such a torrent of abuse, Nicholas had no choice but to investigate the holy man. However, after 2 months with nothing uncovered, their investigation ended. Anyone who criticized Rasputin was condemned by a royal family, pushed to the brink. Politicians who spoke out against him often found themselves relieved of their positions, and more willing, obedient men were put in their place. Rasputin's influence now went beyond their royal family and into politics as well. Even Bishop Theophan attempted to persuade the Tsar to put some distance between himself and Rasputin, but was dismissed. Whether the allegations against Rasputin were true or not, many people now had a legitimate reason to loathe him. If Nicholas wasn't willing to condemn Rasputin with the rest of them, then the two of them would burn together. By associating and supporting a man who was regarded by many as a licentious, perverted and even evil force, Nicholas did little to bolster his own reputation. This reached an extreme when the Tsar took supreme command of the Russian armies during World War I. As this meant frequent trips away from the capital, his wife was put in charge of domestic policy alongside the only advisor she now trusted, Rasputin. The backlash was immediate. All the ministers threatened to resign. The nobles loudly voiced their disgust at Nicholas' decision and pleaded with him to think again, but Rasputin's own headstrong determination had rubbed off on their impressionable Tsar, and he stood his ground. Just as they had feared, Rasputin became Alexandra's close personal confidant. She was not a weak woman, but she was ultimately entirely at the whim of a man able to command immense power. By speaking softly while dressed in rags, Rasputin ordered that the tsarina persuaded a far weaker man to obey her husband. In this way Rasputin held the fate of Russia and all its citizens within his hands. For the many who viewed him as a weird, immoral and dangerous peasant, this was simply unacceptable. It is difficult to know exactly what Rasputin, at this time, believed. His entire demeanor was said to have changed immensely after an assassination attempt in 1914, and it is quite possible that the near-death experience made him a little warier of trusting people. Although he was said to be strict and somewhat harsh with his words, there is no evidence to prove that Rasputin was ever violent or cruel. His character was, and always had been, independent, headstrong and in possession of incredible self-belief. Whether he thought he was doing the right thing or not, Rasputin had made some very dangerous enemies, with the tsarina refusing to acknowledge that he was a bad influence. The nobles decided to take matters into their own hands and eliminate the threat to Russia themselves. A group of conspirators, including the Tsar's first cousin and a member of parliament, tricked Rasputin into meeting with them under the pretense of meeting the Tsar's niece. Rasputin entered the Yusupov palace on the night of the 17th of December 1916 and was not seen alive again. His disappearance was noted immediately the next morning, and a search began. His body was finally discovered, frozen solid beside the riverbank of the Malayernevka River. The man with the hypnotizing eyes was dead. When the conspirators planned Rasputin's murder, their goal was likely to eliminate their powerful influence over the monarchy. However, the monarchy could not be saved, not even by destroying Rasputin. Russia was already hurtling off the cliff by the time he was murdered, and it was far too late to save it. In December 1916, Rasputin wrote a letter to the Tsar about a peculiar prophecy that if he was killed by the Tsar's relations, then none of your children will remain alive for more than 2 years. He also predicted the Tsar's death and the coming of the Antichrist to plummet the country into plague and poverty. He also claimed that the Russian land will die. There were many who doubted Rasputin, who called him a charlatan and a fake that coerced people with pretty words and a hypnotic gaze. They may have been correct, and we have no way of knowing Rasputin's true power. However, the mad monk was right about one thing: their Romanovs were overthrown 10 weeks after his death, and, just as he predicted, within 2 years, the entire family was dead. It had been very easy to place blame at the feet of the peculiar traveling mystic, rather than the weak leader who was. And, if Rasputin was right, dark future. When Nicholas II abdicated his throne, it marked the end of a history of tsardom that stretched back to Ivan IV the Terrible. Nicholas II had never been a natural ruler, and his father had not prepared him to rule. Believing that, as he was in his 40s, he had a great many years yet, he was wrong. And Nicholas, young, naive and ill-prepared, after leading his country into disastrous, worsened, food was scarce, soldiers died in their tens of thousands, and defeat after defeat destroyed any confidence the people had in their leader. Prices soared and riots tore through the country, leaving the nation completely disillusioned by a regime that didn't seem to care about their welfare at all. Revolution was inevitable. Nicholas ordered that the demonstrators be dealt with, and some 200 citizens were shot dead in the street. Eventually even their army garrison at Petrograd, the oldest and most loyal regiment, joined the GHT, and Nicholas had no choice but to abdicate his throne. Aged 48, Nicholas and his family were quickly exiled and imprisoned, forced to live on soldiers' rations, as they remained unaware of their ultimate fate. It was believed the Tsar may eventually be put on trial, but the events of the 17th of July 1918 changed everything. Though there are many connecting accounts, It is believed the family was awoken in the early hours and were led down to a basement room under the guise of safety. However, as they assembled in the room, a ring squad of 7 communist soldiers led in, with time only to splutter, "What? What?" Nicholas was shot dead. Only their young children survived the RST hail of bullets, their jewel-laden dresses shielding them, but they were soon ran through with bayonets and shot in the head at close range. The elimination was not only of the family, but also of the line of tsars. In Russia, the people believed they were better to rule themselves rather than rely on the aristocracy. However, they ultimately discovered that normal men could be just as terrible as tsars. After their murders, the Romanovs became tsar-aged just 26. This was their beginning of a reign that was clouded by bad judgments, mistakes and a blindness to the plight and opinions of his subjects. After their revolution of 1905, Nicholas had promised to listen to his people's demands for basic civil liberties, but because of his strong belief in the divine right of tsars, these promises were soon revoked. And costly wars, conditions in Russia, supposed to be a father to all, but now both were dead, and Russia faced an uncertain, tumultuous, and, if Rasputin was right, dark future.